Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out on such a wintry evening. I know you would all rather be at home wrapping presents or drinking mulled wine or making cookies or whatever at this time of year. I've given a version of this talk a few times before, but usually in front of more of an engineering or a developer audience. So I'm a little bit nervous that I'm going to be standing here telling you all that the sun is rising in the east. But I'm hoping that the way that I approach this may give you an idea about how to talk about these things with people that may not be very receptive to experience design and what it is that we do and why it is important. So I hope you bear with me. I wouldn't put it past you if you just slip out in the back. There's also more alcohol if you... I'd like to start with a story. A friend of mine, talented developer, she couldn't understand my choice of profession. And she at one point, she came to me and she said, I don't know how you can deal with the users. I don't understand that. And she told me about this time that she had worked in a bank and she had created this tiny little web app that only purpose was to look for issues in an issue database. And she was getting these calls, these frustrated calls from users that were putting into the search field all sorts of things aside, other than the issue number. And the thing only searched by issue number. And it said so in the interface. And she was, this was years later, she was still riled up about these people that were coming to her with this problem, which was obviously their problem and not hers. And I told her, I'm so glad you do back, middle layer development. But she pointed though out, this story kind of made me think about how, about this communication problem that is between those that make software and their users, okay? And she was desperate to get rid of these pesky users. And I'm kind of assuming that since you are here tonight, you've had some sort of a interaction. You all have your stories about the pesky users. And these users, they send you emails or they are on the phone with customer support and they're asking, these frustrating questions about, functionality that's actually there and they claim is missing. Or they're talking about, they always get stuck on the same step in the process, even though it's been documented in the help, months ago. And it's always the same issues. And they come to you and they ask them, and even though it takes you just a little while to answer, it's just so frustrating because you'd much rather be working on the next thing than, playing customer support about an issue time and time again, right? So I figured I would go out and I would talk about how people would get rid of that, because I knew this was a pain point for many people, and I could get somebody's attention, and maybe I could sneak in a little bit about why experience design is then important, right? So how do I mean get rid of them, right? The two ways to get rid of your users. Two ways. First way that they get out of your hair is they just leave. They're too frustrated, they just back out, it's not worth it. Or they find an easier way to solve their task or their problem. Or, they've gone through the training, but they never managed to get your tool integrated into their process. So it's just a wasteland out there, and there's nobody using it. And you're not getting bugged, which is great for a while. Because, of course, this is not sustainable in the long run, because in some way or form, users pay our salary, right? So we need them to be there, we just need to get them out of our hair. Okay. The other way to get users out of your hair is to make them successful. Because if they are just merrily solving their things, succeeding in what they need to do, they're not sparing you a thought, right? They're just moving right along to the next thing that they need to do. Prancing along. And they don't care about you in the whole wide world, right? Okay. So there are these two things. And I think that the second one is the one that we want to be striving for, because, again, the users pay our salary in one form or the other. So today I'm going to talk about what we know about people and what we can learn from that, and how we can use that as we design experiences and as we interact, create experiences for people or interactions for people. Okay. And I know that some of you may be sitting here and you may be thinking about this since you read the title of my talk. Who is this woman coming here telling me that she can get rid of my users when she knows nothing about my users or my product or anything? And you're absolutely right. I don't. But I know psychology. And psychology has been studying people for over 100 years. And there are some very important lessons from psychology that we can use and we can apply in what we do. Does that make sense? Okay, very good. There's so few of us, you can shout out questions or comments. If you lose me, I have a thick accent, I wouldn't get offended at all, just shout out me and questions or comments or whatever, okay? No, I don't have to encourage Bill. But So a few things just to give you an idea about what it is that we know about people and how we can apply it that I'm going to go through today, and hopefully there are a few tips and tricks there that you can carry forward into what you do, and also give you this idea that maybe there's more there that I could tap into. So I'm going to talk about the user's one-track mind. I'm going to talk about how they flow like water. And I'm going to talk about basic psychology stuff like memory and attention and decision making and all these things, which are the basis about how people interact with anything and how they approach anything that they're using. Okay? So here's an example, a random example for a random airline. When I say that the user has a one-track mind, it's because the user comes to your website and he has one task to solve. Okay, he's gone there with one thing in mind. And the only thing he's looking for is that thing that will take him to the next step. Hopefully solve the thing, but maybe we have an understanding that it might be a few-step process. So the user is only looking for that key button that will push him to the next step of his process. So somebody designs a very nice website like this, making sure that, all of the offerings are presented on the front page, and you know how it goes. There's been meetings, arguing about who gets most prominent space and where, and all of that thing, where product management and marketing go, fist fighting about number of pixels. But the user doesn't see it. The only thing that he sees is this box here. If there are important information pertaining his purchase outside this box, they might as well not be there. He has no idea, because he's not reading it. He's not looking at it. He's only looking at this thing here, that button that will bring him to the next step. And he's understanding that, okay, maybe there are a few things that I need to do before I can push that button and continue. Does it make sense? So that's, for example, why a couple of years back I wanted to send my husband a Valentine's card on Facebook. I'm a hopeless romantic, as you can tell. And I went through the whole thing. I selected the design. I selected his name. I wrote him a message. I selected the privacy option. Boom, sent it. He never got it. I was a bit, disappointed, because now there was no Valentine's message. So I went back, being curious about these things. I went back thinking, how did I fail at sending a simple message via this Facebook app. And it wasn't until I came back that I noticed this little button down here that says send card. Because I had been up here going, I selected, the design, I punched in this name, I wrote the message, I selected privacy option, boom, continue. Happily satisfied. I got an ad up or something, and I thought, okay, that's what you pay when you use a free Facebook app for romantic purposes. And didn't spare it another thought. This here is an ad. All this banner here is an ad, and this here button brings you to the website of that particular game. They're advertising here. And so people are making mistakes like these in your software every day. Every day. And it's not because they're trying to be difficult or trying to be obnoxious. I mean, it does say send card on the button, doesn't it? Right? Yeah, it does say it. I just never saw it. I just saw the continue. The continue seemed to me like a reasonable place to click to, well, continue. So it's important to think that the people aren't willingly trying to break your design or break the functionality of the system. It's just, they can't do it any other way. They're hardwired to do it. Todd.
Thank you. So in this case also, the continue button is on brand and goes with the rest of their design, but the skip and send card totally don't. So that seems to be a factor as well.
Absolutely. And it's in that magical bottom right corner. Everything streams down to the bottom right corner, right? Even the flow, supports you going there. Yeah. And that's what happens. People, they're not reading the interface. They're not meticulously reading every little label, every little button. They're just scanning. They're looking for the thing that looks most likely. And that's how...
Do you think that was intentional? Like, we'll make this so misleading that they'll be sure to see your ad because they're all going to click continue.
That's a very good question, because this guy who makes free Facebook apps, he gets paid by the click, right? But I'm not sure that he knows what this banner will look like. So, if I had visited this a week earlier, maybe this was like a whole image that went right across. I don't know. So it's hard to tell, but it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
What does the skip button do?
The skip button. So next to the send card, there's a skip button. I have no idea. Yep, no idea. So when people are making do and they're going through the interface, they're trying to understand it the best that they can, they will sometimes come up with ingenious solutions to a problem or ingenious ways through a system to solve an issue. It's completely different from what you thought anybody would do. So that's what I mean by when I say that users flow like water, because they go the path of least resistance, okay? And there was this story, a friend of mine, he used to work for the biggest online media in Iceland. And at some point, he got a very angry call from a reader who told him that he couldn't order tickets, airline tickets online anymore. And he was sitting there going, I work for a news outlet, I'm not quite sure why we're having this conversation, but he was curious, so he started, asking questions and saying, I'm not sure how I can help you. Turns out that for months, or even years, in the weather section of that website, there had been a banner from a particular airline, and that banner allowed you to put in location and date, and you clicked on it, and then it brought you to the airline's website. And this guy, who was on the phone and was very angry and obviously wanted to get out of Iceland as fast as he could, he couldn't find it anymore because they had switched the ad. So there was another banner now in the same location, but it was not for that airline. So he had learned that when you go online to book tickets to the warm places on the globe, then you went to this news outlet, you selected the weather, and then there was a banner where you could buy airline tickets. So he had this idea, and that's what's happening in the user's mind as they're going through this, as they're using your stuff, is that they're building a mental model. They're building themselves an idea about how things work. And the building blocks they use to come up with this idea are the clues that we leave out from them, right? That's the only information they have to work with. And we have to be very careful about how we place that because, as we know, they're not reading it meticulously. They're just scanning through, picking up the crumbs that come into their path. Okay. And at the center of all of this is a very important concept from psychology called working memory. Working memory is the place in our brains where we store information that we are using at the moment to work with. It's what we are conscious of. It's like our desktop in the brain. We collect the information that we need, we put it there, we work with it. And the problem with this desktop of ours is that you could kind of say that it's similar to a Scrum wall. Okay, has everybody here used Scrum in some capacity? You know the deal. You write up little tasks and notes and you hang it on the wall. Okay? And there's only room for so many tickets, so many Post-its. And we all know what happens when somebody opens a window. And that's exactly what happens in your working memory when somebody interrupts you. And I think the research that Elizabeth was talking about earlier is fascinating because that's exactly what's going on. If you're in an app and the phone app comes right over it, it's kind of very abruptly emptying out your working memory. And you were trying to do something. But if it just notifies you and it allows you to finish up, empty your buffer to finish a task that you were working with, it's not as abruptive, right? So working memory is resource limited, it's very volatile, and randomly loses information. And this is very important to realize because it means that we can't expect people to remember things from one screen to the another. Because, and I know this may come as a shock to you, people are not just looking at your software. They may be doing like 5 things at the time, or there's an incoming call, or there's something that needs their attention more. So we can't expect them to remember what they were doing 2 steps down, 2 steps earlier, right? Because that's long gone, that information. But do you know who is very good at remembering things? Computers. Very good at remembering things. So we can support our users by remembering for them. And it doesn't have to be, we don't have to regurgitate everything back to them that they've done. It's enough to leave subtle clues because we're much, much better at recognition than we are at outright recall. So just a little subtle clue here in that if I look at working memory again, I remember, oh, that was the article that I read. Right? Doesn't have to spell it out for me. It's just a subtle clue that I now understand what means. Okay? So that's our role here, is if we're going through a process, tell the user what they've done, tell them what they have accomplished, where they are, so that they know how to proceed from there. Make sense? And even in complex procedures like this one, this app here allows you to buy tickets for the commuter rail. So it kind of builds up, where are you, where do you want to go, what do you want to buy, how did you pay for it. Therefore, it's kind of storing and showing you what you have accomplished and what you're doing. Because working memory is so resource limited and so volatile, it severely incapacitates us in making decisions, any sort of choice. We can only hold in our minds about 3 or 4 choices at a time to actively select between or compare. So nobody is going to use this for their advantage, because it's impossible for them to read all the choices and make any sort of intelligent decision about it, because I had a very important thought there. Well, because we're so resource limited, we can't possibly take in all that information at a time. And that's the choice paradox, which is the choice paradox, very important. The more choices you put in front of people, the worse the decisions they make. Okay. So that is our role as creators of experience, is to choose for the user, is to actively take that role and be the gatekeeper that says, no, we're not going to show all these choices. I know all these choices are relevant, but no, we're not going to show all these choices. As an example here, we would never try in an interface to explain to a user the full business model, the full pricing strategy that you have laid out in your business model, right? You'll pick 3 options. The basic one, which is like, oh, okay. Some people might go with that. The golden one, which is like, oh, well, I wouldn't go that far. And then, oh, there's like a happy medium here. That seems to be something for me. And that's what we do all day. We make this sort of decisions for our users, but it is our job, and we got a time to think about it and talk about it and come up with a good solution that fits our user base. Here's an example of choices that have been made. This designer, this young designer, obviously understood his user base very well. He knows exactly what it is that she needs to finish her task, which is probably to watch her favorite shows, right? But this is what happens. We all have these remote controls at home, and they just, every year there's a new one, right? And they always try to make the universal one, which is like, you pick it up and you go, I don't know what's going on here. That when products are made, they compete on a feature list. The more feature, the better it looks as you are, going through the purchasing decision. But the more feature, the worse it is to use, because you've no idea what to do with most of these features. My dad is an engineer, and a few years back, he bought a new microwave for him and my mom. And that microwave has been brought a few times now back to the shop for a hard reboot, because it has so many buttons on it that basically they just push everything until it does something, and sometimes that freezes it up. So we have to be the guard keepers. We have to stand our ground and say, yes, that's a very good idea, this new feature that you're talking about. Let's put it on our backlog, and let's talk about it when we have enough evidence that it is needed, that the users are actually looking for it. So basically what this happens, and we are kind of back to the design example from that Facebook app, is that if the user finds it difficult to make a decision, he will go with yours. Okay, that is what I'm saying. And you may be sitting out there thinking, wait a minute, that's a bit of a responsibility, and it is. Okay. For example, something that people don't really regard as a decision is that unchecking a box is as much of a decision as checking a box, right? So as you're downloading Flash, should you also be downloading McAfee? That's a decision somebody made, that you should be doing that, and people will do that because that's the default value that's given, right? So who are you benefiting from your decision? Yourself, your business model, your users? What is going on here? We have to be conscious about that. The classical example here, of course, is the newsletter that is automatically checked. And I would be signed up for the newsletter here, and I would be kind of ticked off for getting unsolicited emails from this company. But fortunately, that would never happen, because I would never click on that bright red save button. To me, red means, whoa, wait, it's, you're backing, you're stopping this thing. You're backing out, or it's, So I would always press the cancel button and then be quite confused why my registration hasn't gone through. Just that I was confused about the Valentine's card never getting to my husband, right? That button is also, as we talked about earlier, it's button right. The cancel is to the right of the save button. And placed so closely to each other, completely without reading the buttons. And as you know, I'm not reading the buttons. None of us is reading the buttons. I would always go for the cancel. Anybody here work in Jira? Or for Jira? I have a bone to pick with Jira. Because I've written out so many, it's an issue tracking software. And I've written out so many issues with screenshots and descriptions and da-la-la, and when you come to the bottom of the page, cancel is on the right. And then I go to the developer, like, why haven't you solved this thing that and he's like, it's because I canceled out. Using subtle hints like these, and this is a hint to me to leave that red button alone. It's probably there was some sort of a, it's probably branding color. That's why it's this color. I'm assuming that, but it didn't say. But for example, on this website here, even though you can't read the copy, and this is probably the way that we look at the website, so you know exactly where to click to move on. You know exactly what it is that is expected of you here. And the fascinating thing about that screenshot earlier, did you have a question? No. The screenshot earlier is that this screenshot here is actually taken from help documentation. Okay? Do you think it's gonna, did they think it reduced the number of people clicking on cancel by documenting it? Because if people aren't reading the labels on the buttons, they're not reading your help documentation. I can pretty much guarantee you that. And if you find, this is also taken from help documentation, if you find that you're writing out a help that includes sentences like, to search, click on the search button, that is not helping anybody. If you find that people have problems finding the search button, then that's a problem you need to solve in the interface. You don't solve it by writing it down and attaching it to the software somewhere. That doesn't solve the issue at all. The issue is in the interface and needs to be solved there. But there are plenty of opportunities in the interface to help the user while he's going through stuff, right? We can offer tooltips or error messages or whatnot, so that as he's going through something, if we see that he is going off the track, and we know that he will, right? We can stop him right there and help him get back on track. But that's a very subtle art to do, right? You want me to add the dashes? Seriously? Is that the problem we're facing here? Who's better at adding dashes, me or your software? So when you do it, it's a fine art to think about that you're interacting with a person. No, be helpful, don't be rude. I once saw, there was a talk I saw at a conference where this guy, he took, these two guys, they took a website, I can't remember which website it was anymore, probably not up anymore anyways, but they acted it out. So that, one guy was the website and the other guy was the user, and, they went through, he input something, and then the error message came back, and because it was such an abruptly designed website, it was quite rude when you kind of just read out the error messages. And as they went through the interaction, it was obvious that you could do something to the copy of the website to be more helpful and supportive. Of course, you don't have to go through that, but if there's all the websites that they've made it to apply for visas to come over here, they're very, very abrupt and but yeah, so we have a lot of opportunities to support our users through the software, and that's kind of the idea that I want to leave you with tonight, is that I want you to think of your users kind of like marathon runners, okay? Everybody that starts out on a run wants to finish, right? Like every user that comes to your software wants to make it through. They want to solve the task they came there to solve, right? But not all of them do. Not all of them do. And I want you to think of yourselves as the planners of the marathon. Because you know the track, and you know exactly where it is that you could support your users. And I'm not talking about, offering shortcuts or, giving them a lift or something. It's about, if you just think about, okay, if I put a watering station at the top of that seemingly endless hill, I'm going to get more runners over that hill than if I don't. Am I right? And that's the sort of support that I'm talking about. Not, dumbing it down, not, making the track any shorter. It's just that I know that when you come to this junction, you're going to need some help with this choice. When the marathoners come into Boylston Street and they have to make like a 90-degree turn, we're going to put some volunteers there. We're going to put some signage there so that they know, half conscious and, wishing that this would end, that they know that they have to make that turn so that they can finish. Okay? And that's your role. You're the planners of the marathon, and you're thinking about, where do I put down my watering stations? And how do you know where you should put a watering station? Well, it's pretty easy. At any point in your software, your users need to understand where they are, how they got here, and how they will proceed from here. Okay? And sometimes where they are is not a happy place because they have clicked on the wrong thing, but then they need to understand why they got there. They made the wrong choice at this point, and we can tell them, well, you have to actually fill in this information before we can submit. Okay? Does that make sense? So as you're going through your software, and you could be the developer or the designer or the tester or the product owner or whomever, you're demoing this at a sales conference, just as you're going through this. If you're thinking about these things, you'll find the pain points before you release this on your user base. Make sense? And that's how we get more runners successfully to the goal. Okay. We know a lot about people and how they approach things, how they take in information and how they use it to make choices and move forward. We know where the pain points are, where they need some support. We know that we need to limit their choices so that they can actually make a choice. And we can then help them be successful so they can be busy doing other things than giving you a call and getting in your hair because they always get stuck on the same thing. So really when I say how to get rid of those pesky users is that I'm saying how can we make users successful so that they can go on about doing what they want to do and you can go on about doing what it is that you want to do. Any questions or comments? Anybody want to rant about their pesky users? Absolutely. And this is a prime example because, you know, this is not wrong in any means. And it's good that you're catching this error and not just, you know, throwing away the phone number or whatever. But, you know, stop and look at it and think, should I solve this problem or should the user solve this problem? What is the problem here? If it's too few numbers, then only the user can solve this problem. But if it's adding dashes, hell, I'll add the dashes myself. Absolutely. Instead of, so if you, yeah, and they're like, no, 5 numbers. You would think, right? Because if you, like you're saying, if you learn this here, it doesn't apply on the next website over. It doesn't apply on, because, you know, sometimes they'll require you to have parentheses and, no. You just need the numbers, the digits of the phone number. The way you want to store it in your database is your problem, not mine, right? Yes, like you say, she's describing how form filler will fill in weird information in weird places. In that case, a human eye is better than the computer guessing, right? So we'll have to just figure out where it is, that line.
With their browser interactions that they created their own browser. So now I know it's going to be halfway.
I'm a technical writer, and we always have the problem of proving the value of what we do. And the metric, the ideal metric for what we do is, did the number of calls to your call center go down? What do you guys do to say, yes, you really do need us? Because I can imagine, I mean, I work in a really tough engineering environment where the attitude is, well, they could figure it out. They could figure it out. They shouldn't be using our products anyway.
I've had this quote, problem exists between keyboard and chairs. This is actually my favorite thing. When I go into an engineering environment, and like I said, she was explaining, I've been teaching computer science and engineering students human factors for a decade now. And very often, at the first week of semester, I've been teaching at the University of Iceland. As you can imagine, it's a small university. There are not very many courses available. So at the first semester, and on the first week, I will notice that in the back row, I'll have a line of computer science students that are only taking my course because it's the only one available and they want to graduate, right? And they're sitting at the back, and they lean against the wall. And they think they've got me, lined up as, some cuckoo, and they don't know why they're there. They're just gonna, they're just gonna suffer through it so they can get the units and graduate. Fourth or fifth week, as I've taken them through a few memory exercises, all of a sudden their chairs click forward, and a light goes on, and they go, wait a minute, there's something here. And at the end of the semester, these are my most, avid advocates everywhere. These are my students that will contact me years after the course and ask me questions and directions. But it's a matter of getting them to understand what's going on, because while the attitude is problem exists between keyboard and chair, it's not their problem. Like my friend said, she was so angry with the users bringing their problems to her, when they were so obviously their problem. If I can get them to understand that it's actually their problem, they will accept the responsibility. But it's exactly that. How can I get them to understand? Because in all their training, they've never had the discussion about psychology, how the brain works, how people make decisions, these things that we've been talking about tonight. So I would love, call me anytime, get them in a room, let's have this discussion, seriously. Because, once you get the ding, they're all on board. But while the problem is not theirs, they're not going to touch it.
Nancy, I would say as well, things that we look at are how do we reduce calls to the call center by making interface changes or process changes, but also what's the completion rate of the task. Now, it's different if you're in a regulatory kind of environment where they have to do this thing as part of their job. But you can also track things like the number of times someone fills out a form and clicks cancel. They probably did not intend to do that, 50% of the time they're using the form, right? And so you can use a variety of metrics to track how to improve your application. How often just give up. Right.
Yeah, and how quickly are they, how quick are they going through the process? Because the longer it takes, the easier sidetracked they are, the easier it is for them to get sidetracked, and it's an indication that they are insecure in what they're doing.
And with webcams now, you can actually watch what percentage of your users cry while they're using it. It's wonderful.
I have had a user cry in a user test. That was not beautiful. that was, so identify their pain points. And that's the origin of this title of the talk, how to get rid of those pesky users. Because, and the original title was more strongly worded, is that that is a problem I know that many developers will identify with, because they spend so much time in support and in maintenance of old versions that they don't have time to finish the task of today, which is developing the next version. So that, identifying their pain points and understanding how we can address that. Go ahead.
I find telephone interfaces often to be even worse than graphical interfaces. And I wonder if you've studied that at all, and whether there are professionals who put much thought into them, and whether they sometimes are trying to create failure.
Trying to create failure? Yes, I have been through software where I felt like I was being set up to fail. Seriously, because you're like, I have no idea what to do next. And and you always revert back to this. I once had this interface that was introduced into my workplace, and I called over the person responsible, and I explained to him how I had failed using this interface. And he looked at the interface, and he looked at me and said, well, we designed this interface for people with above average intelligence. And I was so sidetracked by that I, of course, immediately started apologizing. Oh no, I just did that. I'm so blonde. Seriously? When he'd gone and I sat there, I was going, I can't believe I said that. But it's not that they're designed to make you fail. They're designed so that they work. The mental model that the developer has in his head works perfectly. And he can solve the task using the software as he had laid it out. But he hasn't left enough clues out there for the rest of us to follow where he's going.
Sometimes the exact opposite setup can cause the same problem. Donald Norman tells this great story about he was working with some software, and the minute he looked at it, he knew that the fact that the enter and the return button did very different things, sometimes disastrously, would be a big problem. He suggested that, and all the managers and everybody said, no, nobody ever makes that mistake. Ever. Because if they did, they'd come tell us about it. So he went to all the secretaries using the software, and he said, do you ever make this mistake? Every one of them said, all the time, and it's really frustrating. And he said, why didn't you tell anyone about it? Because it was clearly my mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. The users are so quick to make apologies. Like any of you who have watched user testing, or any of you who have gone through, a frustrating piece of software, the first person you doubt is yourself, right? I'm not really good with computers. No, with there's some excuse that, and it makes you feel. It eats into your self-worth, and that's what. Ultimately, what I want to do, a successful person, somebody who succeeds, feels good about themselves, right? But, using software that makes you doubt yourself every day is death by 1,000 paper cuts. It eats into your self-worth little by little. And that is cruel and unusual punishment, to have anybody go through that anywhere. And that's what we should fix, right?
So you mentioned that, and we all know, people find crazy workarounds to get their jobs done or get their tasks done. What's the craziest thing that you've encountered?
It's got to be crazier than the guy who went to the weather page to get an airplane ticket.
Yeah, I kind of. Yeah, that is kind of my craziest workaround. I think the guy who went to the weather page. Yeah, I think that's why I used that example. I'm trying to think of another one. Well, nothing's come to me. Anybody else have a crazy workaround?
I'm still working on it. I'm still haven't figured
Interesting. I remembered another example. There was a group in my class who was working on a project, and one of the guys was venting to me about being frustrated with his fellow students in his group because somebody had taken on the task to kind of write up the report. And this guy had then taken the report and was adding images into it or whatnot. And he noticed that the guy who wrote up the report always did Control-Enter to switch between paragraphs. And he was trying to format the document, and he was obviously a more experienced Word user, so this was driving him crazy because he changed the size of the font, and then all the lines went haywire because it was always this Control-Enter to get to the next line. And then and he found this to be a problem that existed between the keyboard and the chair. So I took a look at their template, and what was going on was that if you used just enter, there was an indent. That was a template, the indent in the first line. And this guy who had been writing up the report didn't want the indent. So he used the Control-Enter to get rid of the indent. But he had no concept of styles or paragraphs or things that you use in Word to do these things. So he found this workaround, which was to do Control-Enter and made the document impossible to work with.